Very excited to be talking to Mr. Adam today, an entrepreneur, a genius. I'm excited that he's letting me pick his mind. And the first question that I always like to ask is, was this something that you wanted, to be an entrepreneur? Or was this something that your parents kind of pushed onto you? Like, what was your upbringing like?
Well, that's a great question. My father had worked for a large corporation for most of his life, and maybe we all kind of run from to the opposite of what we know. And I remember his advice early on being, and this was in relation to the firm that I first started working with out of college, which was a partnership. And he said, partnership's a great place to be because you're an owner in the business. Um, and I guess I heard that, sort of took it on board, but I don't know how seriously I did. Um, I think from an early stage, I had a reasonable sense of independence and a thought that, maybe if you could think you can do something better yourself, then maybe you should go do it, right? You're trying to change the organization you're in, and but ultimately, if you're persistently a squeaky wheel and think you've got a better way, it's time for you to go do that. And so I started my first business with a couple of colleagues, more because we thought there was a better way to do it than because we had this sort of dying passion to work for ourselves. But since then, you grow in confidence and ability to sort of stand on your own 2 feet in that regard, and then you have an idea, and it's like, okay, well, again, let's go do it. So that's a long and sort of tortuous answer, but I don't think maybe my father sowed a seed, but certainly growing up, that wasn't what I knew. I knew him going off to work every day, for a large company.
Okay, and you said that you eventually get the confidence to stand on your 2 feet. Like what was it like overcoming that fear?
Well, I had I guess I'd figured out the building blocks of the path to start the first company. We had some clients who had indicated they'd be supportive. I had two other partners I was launching with, um, and uh, it seemed not that different from what we were doing already. We probably underestimated some of the complexity back then of starting up the business and setting up email servers and so on, because back then there was no Gmail, and you needed a phone system and you needed office space and all of those things. But they didn't seem impossibly difficult. The hardest thing was like, okay, we're going to have some business, and we had a launch client, and so we just sort of got on and did it. But a little bit. Sometimes it is that Nike thing of just do it and you'll figure it out. You look back and go, boy, wow, maybe that was a bit harder than I thought it would be, but maybe it wasn't.
Have you ever heard of the quote that the best investment you could ever make is in yourself? Is that because it seems to me like that's the mindset that you've kind of had almost your whole life.
Well, I look back on it, and I have kids of my own who are now, one's just entered the workforce, and I sort of look at their perspective. Now, they'd probably tell you that the last thing they want to do is work for themselves initially. I don't know. I think my son will end up certainly taking an entrepreneurial path. But they've also seen the ups and downs and stresses and strains of working for yourself, right? It's not all plain sailing. So I think you have to get comfortable with that level of uncertainty from day to day, which is like, I don't know how the year's gonna, are we gonna make the year, or we're gonna hit our numbers, or we're gonna do that stuff. I think that I I look at people in other industries, I look at people in biotech, I look at people who frankly take on a lot of other people's money to start their businesses. And I'm full of admiration for them, but I'm not sure that I would have done the same. So we didn't borrow money. We sort of bootstrapped. And frankly, I was always much more comfortable and have always been much more comfortable doing that because then I don't have to answer to anybody apart from, your clients and customers or, or your business partners if you have them.
Like it's funny you said that about biotech because I've been studying, forgive me if I pronounce his name wrong, Aswaf Damodaran, and he was saying how like he thinks it's so stupid when startups go and take debt. Like, why not equity? Because debt is like the stupidest thing you could ever do because it's like you have absolutely no cash flow coming in. So why would you crush your company before before it sprouts?
Yeah, it's but those biotech guys, they'll work 10, 15, 20 years in a particular field chasing a particular biotech dream, and it may or may not happen. And if they implode, everything sort of just evaporates around your ears if you're unsuccessful. We rented some office space once off a company that was trying to develop an anti-obesity drug, and they got it to clinical trial stage, and it failed. And suddenly everything shut down. That's a very, very different pattern, and to me, that's just a wholly different level of risk tolerance and appetite from what I would have. But there are people who've been tremendously successful in that. There's also a lot who haven't succeeded.
Wow. Tell me a little bit about your time in consulting. Like, how did that come about?
So that was the situation I was describing previously. I worked for a different consulting firm here in town. They had a wanted to pursue. It was somebody owned that business, and they wanted to pursue a strategy that was very much a generalist strategy that they could turn their hand to advising people in any industry. We thought that all things being equal, a client would rather hire somebody who knew something about their industry, and that was the way that the world was evolving and getting more competitive. And that was a philosophical difference at that point. And so, it was 2000. It was just 2002, which was just after the first dot-com bubble burst. The market was pretty poor, but actually it was a perfect time to start a business because the opportunity cost was low in terms of what I would have been paid that year. Plus, we were able to hire some fantastically talented people out of the leading business schools in town who in a boom time wouldn't have given us another look. But they were, all the big companies like McKinsey and Bain and BCG are cutting back on their hiring. So we showed up and, they were interested and we hired some fantastic people and got up and running. So that's how that happened. And again, we had a really wonderful launch client who supported us with projects from the get-go. And that got us off and running.
And did you have a mentor on your path to success? Because it seems to me like you almost kind of viewed your dad as a mentor. And do you believe that to be successful or to get to success, one needs a mentor?
That's a good question. My dad passed when I was 25, so he really wasn't around at that stage to give me advice. And I don't know whether I'd have done what I did if he had done. He was probably a little bit more conservative, a little bit more risk averse. Um, so no, I've had supportive clients, but I've had actually, everybody says you should have mentors and all the rest of it. Maybe things would have been easier or better if I had, but there wasn't anybody I really turned to externally to sort of discuss the business and how to grow it and how to be successful with it. What I have had for the last 25 years is a very supportive business partner. He and I are co-CEOs in our current business, and we've been longtime partners together. Now he's also, what is he? He's probably 8 years older than me, as it happens. But we have worked together for all those years, and so that has replaced mentorship in that the two of us kind of solve problems together when we need to, and so it's a different structure. But no, I haven't had external mentors in the classic sense.
And I'm glad you brought up your co-CEO because I'm really curious about FlatWorld. Like, how did that come about? Because you were in consulting, and so it did you almost like pack up your bags essentially and just decided to embark on this new endeavor with your partner? Like, what was that like?
No, we had sold our consulting company to a much bigger company with a view to being able to scale much more rapidly. It turned out that being a very small part of a 12 billion corporation was very, very different. The vision that we had sought to pursue in conjunction with them when we arrived, things weren't quite as we'd been led to believe. And we realized that instead of our hope was that we would be freed up from a lot of the business of consulting and running the business to do more of the practice of consulting, spend more time with clients, which we enjoyed and were reasonably good at. That turned out not to be true. It's amazing how much bureaucracy there is in a 12 billion corporation. And so after a relatively short period of time, we said, this isn't what we want to do with the rest of our lives. And so we decided to leave. We left to actually pursue an acquisition of a business that we had identified, and we had an agreement with the CEO to purchase. Although when she then took that to the board, they decided not to sell the business. And so we said, okay, well, what else are we going to do now? And our consulting practice has been in the information space. A part of the information space was educational publishing. And so we knew the industry very well, and we'd always seen it and thought that there was an opportunity if you could find a way to break into it to disrupt the industry. And so it was like, okay, well, we've always talked about doing this. Why don't we go do this? And so we figured out how to, it took us a while, but we figured out how to break in and disrupt the industry.
Wow. And what's your proudest achievement throughout your amazing career, would you say?
Wow. Well, I think that the in the current venture of affordable textbooks, my proudest moment was when my son was in college and his professor assigned him one of our books. It was like, okay, this is great. We've sort of made it. We're on our way here. So that was a big moment.
And like any regrets, like if you could redo anything throughout your career, like what would you say you would have redone, or are you completely satisfied with how everything went?
Um, I think when you leave an organization, um, if you're making an impact, then people are generally, sad or disappointed to see you leave. I wish those transitions had potentially been a little bit smoother. So, I've been fortunate to have worked with good people along the way. And I wish I had found a way to smooth those transitions, but it's always difficult. People, don't always take it well when you say you want to go off and do something different with your life, because they sort of take it a little personally. It's like, well, what's wrong with our organization? Um, so perhaps that. But I don't spend a whole lot of time looking back. I'm, pretty focused on looking forward and the road ahead.
And let me ask you, do you think there's such thing as like over education, like being a little too focused on like being educated in this, being educated in that? Because I feel like sometimes there are people who are like so focused on getting all these degrees, and then when they get a certain degree, they get another one, and that they never end up taking action. Like, do you believe like being too overeducated can essentially hold you back? Like, what's your thought on that?
I think you need to be clear about why you're getting a particular credential, right? You can be doing it to obtain knowledge. You can be doing it to expand your network. You can be doing it because you need a piece of paper that allows you to be viewed differently by others, and there's always some combination of all of the above. And it costs you money, but actually the other cost that's so substantial is the opportunity cost, right? So whether it's spending 2 years of time or whether it's spending 2 years outside of the workforce because you're getting this credential, those are very real costs that you're bearing, right? It happens that I was embarked on a master's in finance when I decided to move to the US. So I didn't complete that. And I came into consulting role at the same level as a bunch of people who were post MBA. And at first I was somewhat intimidated by all these smart, highly driven, talented people who came in. They'd been to Harvard Business School, they'd been to Sloan, they'd been wherever, leading business schools in the country. And I hadn't. But I also realized that my career to date had given me skills and exposure that they hadn't had. And that the analytical side of what they knew, I could learn the consulting framework. There were certain things that I would have absolutely benefited from. And those programs at a top business school are tremendous, and you learn a lot and you meet a lot of people. The lack of network didn't really inhibit me, but I do think that my lack of understanding of certain areas, I didn't know very much about marketing. I didn't know much about private equity. I didn't know much about a number of different areas, and that would have been beneficial. So I think you got to just be clear about what's the reason for doing it. Is it just because you want to defer your undergrad experience and extend it a little bit? Is it you just need to be crystal clear as to why you're doing it. So I wouldn't tell people, no, you should never get an MBA or you should never get a JD, or actually a JD, I might say, look very carefully before you did that, because most lawyers don't make much money. There's a small number who do, but there's a lot who don't. I'd just be clear about why you're doing it.
Of course. And are there any books that have shaped your way of thinking?
You
And
know, I really don't read many business books. And the reason I don't is because most of them are an over extruded Harvard Business Review article. So they've got some thesis that can be well encapsulated in an article, and then they've stretched it out to fill a book. And so, the fundamental premises usually can be distilled down much more succinctly, and you don't need to read a full book for it. So I think that there are, however, there's two books that do jump out. One's called The Outsiders, which is the basic premise of the book is that the most successful CEOs are not only those who can generate great profits, but they can reinvest those profits successfully in other avenues of growth within the business. That's the thesis. William Thorndike, I think, is the author of that one. And then there's a book called The Star Principle that says, in essence, the most important thing you can do in life is to align yourself with an organization that is growing and is in a growth sector, because that's more important than how smart you are, how hard you work, any other dimension. Because if you join a company that's part of that trajectory, that growth will provide you with stretched career opportunities. It'll test you. It'll provide you with superior compensation and economic outcomes and more challenge. And that's, you could work incredibly hard for a company that is growing at 1% or is not even growing, and it's still the same you, but your outcome will be dramatically different in life. So focus on finding something that's in a high growth area. It trumps everything else.
an entrepreneur needs many, many skills. What would you say is number one?
Um, I think it's to rapidly assimilate information that comes at you from multiple different angles and to actually turn it into a decision and move forward. So you can spend a lot of time thinking, theorizing, and not doing. You can spend a lot of time doing and not thinking. But to be successful, you've got to be able to blend the two together. So you've got to think. You're never going to have perfect information. You're never going to have green lights against any opportunity. There's always going to be ambiguity and uncertainty. Otherwise, everybody would have done it. But you need to give it your best shot with the information you've got and then do something, right? Nobody was really successful by doing nothing. Now, that doesn't mean you have to jump after every opportunity, but you got to place some bets ultimately. And so you got to distill information to a position where you're then ready to place some bets and then get on and do it. But keep it simple. There's an enormous, life is very complicated. It's very easy to overcomplicate and just get sort of paralysis and fog from all the noise. So just try and keep stuff simple. Don't overcomplicate it.
Of course. And wow, I hope you didn't take my last question, because my last question was going to be, what wisdom and knowledge would you like to leave to future generations?
Yeah. Um, and this one sounds, I don't mean this to be negative. I think you need to have a steady hand and a steady kind of outlook on life. And on the bad days, remember that life is never as bad as you think it is in the moment. But equally on the high days, don't get too carried away, because life's never quite as good as you think it is on those great days, right? When you close a big deal or something falls your way or whatever. It's usually somewhere in the middle. And as long as you're sort of moving in the right direction, I have a friend, and she was a very successful athlete, 2 Olympic golds and a silver to her name. And she said she used to beat herself up every day in training, and to the point of sort of exhaustion. And then she actually realized that was unsustainable, and that what you needed to do was just each day perform above average. And if you performed above average, you would be getting better. You couldn't be at your best, literally at your best every day. That just physically wasn't possible. You couldn't set a new record every time, you did a training piece or whatever. But as long as that piece was executed above average, you knew you were getting better. And therefore you can cut yourself a break mentally a little bit. Because it's about quality repetition over a period of time, and then suddenly people will drop behind you and fall in your wake, and you'll be doing better and better. So just do a bit better than average, do better than average each day.
Wow, that's a lot of wisdom.
So that's not my wisdom, that's somebody else's, but it resonated.
No, of course.